and this is Interfaith Paths to Peace Community of Practice for learning about the Enneagram. And every Friday at 3 o'clock, we gather to have conversations about the Enneagram. We are finishing up a 3-week series where we're looking at the different triads. We started 2 weeks ago with the heart triad, the 1, the 2, and the 2, the 3, and the 4. And then we did the head triad last week, the 5, 6, and the 7. And we're going to finish up on the crown of the Enneagram with the 8, the 9, and the 1. So thanks everybody for joining us on Zoom. For those that are joining us on Facebook, there'll be opportunity for you to write questions or comments in the chat box, and we will bring those into the conversation. Those of you that are on Zoom, we will also have an opportunity for you to ask questions and be engaged in the dialogue. So thanks for being with us today. And I do have a Prezi that I'm going to share. If you ever want the Prezi, I can send you the link. So email me or let me know. I can, maybe as we get going, I'll put that in the chat box as well, so you can pull down the link of all of the different slides that I'm using if you want to come back to that at some point. Happy to share that with you. So to begin, let me get on my Prezi here. I want to, again, start with reminding us why we do Enneagram work. The purpose of the Enneagram, or why we're into it, is how do we create more harmony? How do we create, first of all, self-awareness? How do we understand ourselves, understand our personality, presuppositions, the ways in which we show up in the world, so that we can have more self-understanding, so that we can have a number and not be a number. Self-awareness allows us to have more control over how we show up and interact in the world. And so the Enneagram is a great tool for self-awareness. And secondly, because it's really important to create harmonious relationships, to be able to have empathy with other people, to understand why other people kind of show up the way they do show up in the world, and so that we can have compassion for them, knowing that they show up differently, but they're just as screwed up as we are, just in a different way. And I think the Enneagram actually does a good job. I know a lot of people don't like that the Enneagram tends to be negative, or I think it tends to define us where we go when we lock down into our egoic personality structure. So that's not bad or good, but I think the Enneagram really points out where we go when we get unhealthy. And sometimes the Enneagram work, we say when we're healthy, we have a lot of traits of a lot of the numbers, and we can kind of move around, we can be flexible. But when we're unhealthy, that's where we get really unique in the ways in which we get unhealthy. So anyway, that's the reason that we're doing Enneagram work, and I want to thank all of you all for showing up and being a part of that. We have a great panel. I'm going to skip through some of these. I don't know. This is always a fun little side. The Enneagram describes these personality types that are kind of archetypical, and they show up in all kind of different places. I don't know if you've ever seen the Enneagram according to Pooh, but everybody in the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, has an Enneagram number, and these are really funny. In fact, I'm an Enneagram 7, and I always loved Tigger. And that is such a perfect example of an Enneagram 7. So we're going to be looking at style type 1, which is rabbit. And then we're going to be looking today at 8, which is gorilla, which often doesn't show up, but is a character. And then, of course, the Enneagram 9 is Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh is a 9, and we're going to get to look at the 9s today. So I always like this slide. I think it's kind of fun to look at the different characters. And maybe you have some relationship with your number there. So essentially what the Enneagram is going to do, it describes these predispositions towards perception and behavior that were established in early childhood to help us thrive and survive in whatever childhood environment we have. So when we go through today and start looking at the 8, the 9, and the 1, we have a great panel of folks that are going to kind of share their number. And this comes out of what's called the narrative tradition of Helen Palmer, that really encourages us to learn about the numbers through listening to people talk about their experience of themselves rather than just taking a test or rather than learning information. So it's a narrative tradition that I really believe is powerful and important. So we'll ask our panel as we get to their number to describe themselves, but also talk a little bit about their early childhood experience that may given rise to these structures of personality, perception, and behavior. I think that helps us. I'm always interested when I'm having a challenging relationship with someone to imagine the child or to imagine the environment that they were having to try to thrive and survive in. And that's the reason why they developed maybe these characteristics that may be challenging to me, but I often allows me to give them grace and allows me to have a little more empathy and understanding for who they are or why whatever behavior right now may be challenging to me. So that's another reason to understand the early childhood environment that these came from. So we're going to jump into looking at the 8, the 9, and the 1. And I'll be, as we've looked at the other ones, specifically, this is called the instinctual triad, or what we would call the gut triad. So we often talk about the numbers being centered in one of these triads, and they're doing different things with a similar issue. And so in the gut triad, it has to do with their instinctual energy, or we often call it the anger. So they do different things with that. We'll see that the 8 go out with their anger. The 9s are the most ambiguous with their anger, and the 1s go in with their anger in the form of self-criticism. So they're working with instinctual energy, often understood as anger, but they do different things with that. And so we'll look and see what they're doing with the issue of anger or their instinctual energy and why they're doing that. So the way I'd like to start, we're going to look at, just give a brief description. We're going to start with 8s. And I'm very thankful to have Jim MacArthur on today on our panel to talk about being an 8. Jim has been on these panels before, and I just so appreciate the way he reflects about himself and shares an 8. And so when we get finished with a little bit of description here, Jim, I'll invite you to jump in and share some about the way in which you experience yourself. So a brief overview of the 8s. They are considered sometimes the challenger or the boss. And 8s often come across to us as being kind of challenging. They have this large kind of energy around them. Often the way I understand that is like a force field that goes around about 3 feet of them. And you always kind of know when you bump into it. And 8s can come off as challenging, but often what they're doing is they're working with the issue of trust. And they want to know if they can trust you. And often what happens is they'll come towards us in what may feel like an aggressive way, but they want to kind of know where we are, and so that they can know where they are. It's kind of this way of bumping up against us. And 8s really like it if you'll kind of stay in that energy with them, because then they can trust you. When we back away from 8s, they begin to fear that they can't trust us because they don't know where we are. Like they may be sneaking around behind us, and they don't trust that, because a lot of the issue that they have is around trust and developing trust with relationships. But they're often they can be these very magnanimous leaders. And we can see when they're integrating, they go to a 2, which is what we call a bear going to a teddy bear. So they can really open up their heart when they trust you. And there's a really safe space within this force field of an 8. Like if you know 8s, like one of the things about Jim is and Jim and I have had a relationship in a variety of different ways. One of it, I was a pastor, and he was on the session. He was in charge of the session. And we would often bump up against each other. But then there was Jim let me into his circle, and it was like a teddy bear. Like when he would hug me, it was like the safest place to be in the world. And they are often, they will fight for you if you get into their inner circle of trust. They will really stand up for you. They will go to bat for you. And they'll really have these big hearts. And they can really make vibrant, dynamic leaders. But as you can see, when they begin to disintegrate, that anger can begin to become very forceful and at times feel dominating. And as you can see, as they move down into their lower levels, the ruthless outlaw, the omnipotent megalomaniac, and the violent destroyer. So you can see that their challenge with trust leads them to run over people, to often be destructive with their anger in relationships. Under stress, they do go to a 5, which is an interesting place. They can look depressed at a 5. Again, 5s are the most introverted. They can really go within themselves and break off from relationships, and that's often not a good place for 8s to be. So a couple of other these. I don't think I've shown this slide much. I want to show, these are famous 8s in the world. Sigourney Weaver, which is awesome because she was a great 8 in Aliens, right? She was really awesome. Martin Luther King, Glenn Close, and Sean Connery are often known as 8s. So that gives you some personality traits. On the Myers-Briggs, I haven't shown this slide a lot either. Oh, I'm not sure I have that. Often we like to line up Myers-Briggs with Enneagram. So looking at our top triad 8s, they are extroverted. As you can see, that's a common theme for most 8s is extroversion. But then they share N and S's, and they share J's and P's. So they're pretty diverse. They also tend to be thinkers. So 8s tend to be extroverted thinking types on the Enneagram. Again, that's not to completely box them up with Myers-Briggs, but I think those are 2 types that are extroverted thinking types. So, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being on the call today and joining us. And if you want to unmute yourself, introduce yourself a little bit to us, and then talk about what it's like to be an 8 or how you understand that. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. It's well, let me back up. When Judd, I will freely admit that when Judd started talking about Enneagram stuff years ago, I had absolutely no use for it. And it wasn't until I was in a really bad workspace or work time, and I'd done it, and I was like, yeah, whatever, an 8. And then I started looking at like some of the like what happens when things are going bad. How do you behave? And I was like, oh, ruh-roh. And so that was kind of my first thing, was because I was in a space and I found myself kind of being I was kind of in a passive, looking at like some of the and it was kind of passive aggressive, and it was really kind of self-indicting. The other thing that I will say is that, and I always forget that the other area, the 9 and the 1 have anger too. anger is, I can really like being angry. It's it is almost like a drug, and I am at my most dangerous when I'm angry and feel self-righteous, because I can say things, I can do things that I regret for years and years and years later. And so I'm amazingly careful around it. I mean, it's almost like you're an alcoholic, and you have to be careful around how you use anger, because there's a lot of power in that. And what's been really interesting is my younger daughter is an 8, and so I went through a while where I thought of being an 8 is almost like a family curse, because I can kind of trace it back a couple generations. And so it's been real interesting to try and interact with my younger daughter around how she can be angry and be careful with it and so forth, because it's real easy to get angry, stay angry, and then just you've got this little like power source that you can just tap into, and that's a I mean, there's good that you can get out of that if you harness it and use it correctly, but there's also there's a I mean, it can be self-deceptive in a way, because you end up with a disproportionate sense of power, and maybe then it's real easy to say, well, the ends justify the means, or any number of things. Several of the things that Judd kind of referenced, the idea of the force field is very much, I've had that for a long time, and if you're kind of in my circle, if I feel like I'm responsible for you, or I'm protective of you, then nobody's going to hurt you. It doesn't matter who you are. If they do, they're going to have a big old bruise, because they will have to go through me. And that's sometimes people don't want that, right? And so that gets real tricky. And the trust thing is that's a huge kind of dynamic in this, at least for me. I was talking with somebody. I'm relatively recently divorced, and one of the things that I've kind of been able to work through is that once I've lost trust in somebody, it is almost impossible for me to kind of get over that. And my willingness to take physical or financial risks are pretty high. My willingness to take risks of the heart are really low sometimes. And that's a kind of a strange sort of thing, because people would be like, oh, you just did X. And I said, yeah, that didn't scare me. Oh, well, then you should go meet this person. You really liked them. And and as long as I keep them at arm's length, that's easy. But if I try to, if you end up in a relationship with somebody and they may hurt you, then that is really challenging, especially if they're kind of inside your circle, because that's a weird space to be, and it does feel like betrayal, and that's when it gets really wonky. I can trace some of this back to my youth. My sense, rightly or wrongly, is that my sense is that I always felt like I needed to. I grew up in a fairly strict, fairly demanding household, and had parents that loved me in their own ways, but it was not. But it was a space where it was easier to feel like you had to earn affection, and so as a result of that, I got very good at that. And the way that I tended to do that was doing the harder thing or doing the bigger thing or whatever. And that was kind of the way I did it. So that was, I mean, everybody kind of has their own way of kind of working through that kind of stuff. But that was my way of doing it. And, you know, and in lots of ways that has made me successful in many respects. Mm. I'm part owner of a restaurant in downtown Louisville called Harvest, and I own another business outright that's over in Westport Village. And those type of risks and that type of thing is pretty easy for me. I may end up back in a corporate space, and when I am in a larger corporate space, I tend to take on roles that are fairly responsible roles. But so I guess my youth and kind of the way I did do things has served me well in many respects, but it also makes it so that it kind of comes with a price. So,
Jim, I want to open it up to questions from the both from Facebook Live, but also from the Zoom. One of the questions that's often asked of eights is, how can we, when we feel your anger, what's the best way to be in relationship with you around that? Because I think that's one of the things that people find challenging. My sense has been that eights actually want you to kind of stay in there with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to know, you know, it's a fair question to say, why are you angry? I'm even okay if you want to have an argument. It is. Yeah, I know you find that hard to believe, right? But I'm also, it's not socially acceptable, but I'm also okay if, you know, it turns into, you know, if there's like some physicality to it. I mean, that doesn't necessarily bother me. One of the things I can remember when I was in college, there was a friend of mine who you know, I look back on it now and I felt like I'd been betrayed. But I confronted him, and he was with like 4 or 5 other people, and I was just absolutely just fit to be tied angry. And I watched the whole room full of people just step back away from me. And that was one of those things where I was like, oh, you know, there was something there. I didn't know what it was at that point. I was 20. So, yeah.
But well, let's open it up to some other questions. Yeah, those of you that are on Zoom, you have some questions for Jim. This is a great, it's not easy to get eights to do this work. And so Jim's always faithful to jump on when I do these things. So this is a great chance for us to have some conversations with an 8. So are there questions on Facebook, or if anybody's on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself and let's have some dialogue with Jim.
Judd, I'll just, I didn't know it's, as usual, I don't know if it's a question per se, but just that it's good to hear that anger isn't a pushing away or an ending of something, but can be more of an invitation. Because I've had a couple of supervisors that were 8s, and I would either like hide from them or move toward them in a way that I think may have not felt good for them, instead of just standing still. Or maybe you should answer that. So for me, I guess I felt like my only choice is, it's that fight, flight, or freeze thing. And I would run toward them and say, no, you're not right, or run in the other direction. But do you want that confrontation? Or is it, please just stand still and let's have this conversation? But it doesn't feel like a conversation.
I guess the thing
to us.
Yeah, the thing that makes me crazy is when you push on something and everybody just backs away, because it's like, and I used to in a workspace, one of the things I used to say is, okay, here's what I'm thinking, prove me wrong. And it took me a long time to realize that was not, and I was fine if somebody proved me wrong. I was like, just kind of throw a straw man out there, let's go after it, right? And what would make me crazy would be when nobody would like push on it. So I'm okay if you want to kind of come and push on me, because quite often that usually works out the best, but at least stand still. You know, backing away, running away or whatever, evaporating. Yeah, that makes me crazy.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I have a question.
Yeah, Ida.
So is it Jim? I'm sorry,
Yes.
I'm not wearing my glasses. Thank you for sharing. So I'm a 9, and I find myself moving between the 8 and the 1 periodically, depending on what my environment brings forth. And so, but when I'm in an 8, I can resonate with the anger that you speak of, because it's kind of like, I know that I'm disagreeing with you in this moment, but what I also know is that I can back up with facts and figures and data where I'm coming from, right? So it makes me feel even more justified in my anger, which then it's just, I lap it up. I may as well. So I totally resonate with that part of you. I guess my question to you is, being an 8 all the time and having done the Enneagram work, when you come into that place of anger where you know that you probably right in the disagreement, how have you incorporated this Enneagram work into your day-to-day when you find yourself in that place of confrontation?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest, one of the, I joke, and I've said this to my daughter, my younger daughter, repeatedly, but it goes to everybody, which is, it would be really great if at like age 7, somebody walked up to you and said, okay, here's the user manual for you, right? Right, and the reality is that, you don't get that, and you try to figure this stuff out, and sometimes you're wrong and so forth. The biggest thing for me is to try to dial it back, and kind of hold myself back, because it can be, I can come across as way more aggressive than I am. I mean, one of my things is, in my corporate existence, I had to have lots of discussions about dress code. And the last thing I ever want to do is have a conversation with somebody about what they're wearing. And so at a point, I got really kind of frustrated with it, and people thought I was just really angry. And the reality was I was just frustrated, and the absurdity of it. And so you have to be kind of careful about how other people will perceive you. So if I'm in a good space, then I can kind of I can slow that down and try to think about, where the person is and so forth. If I'm depending on if I'm in a bad space or not as gentle, then it can be challenging, and just trying to be aware of that everybody is not the way you are, or everybody doesn't experience things or come at things the way you do, is huge, and challenging, right?
Yeah,
Thanks,
what
Kate.
I'm hearing you saying is that when you're in that place, is the best thing to do is to create the space to allow the other person to represent who they are and where they're coming from, and that sort of helps you get your message through better. Is that right?
Absolutely. And sometimes it also involves, saying, hey, this is an idea that I had. I'm just going to pick this up. I'm not particularly wed to it. So I'm okay if we poke a hole in it, right?
Right.
And,
I love that. Yeah.
and to give people that permission, because
Right.
sometimes, because there are lots of folks who have ideas and they think that, I mean, I guess I do too, but there are times when you go, I don't really care about this, but I have, I'm going to voice an opinion.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Good
Ken,
stuff. Thanks.
Ken, you had a question?
Yeah. Hi, Jim. Thanks for speaking with us today. So I thought I've been having recently is about anger and about how we live in a society that's both, what's the word for it? Secularly and religiously a little bit anger phobic. Like there's a lot of shame around anger. Like, oh, well, you shouldn't be feeling that. Oh, well, you need, like, this is not something you should be angry over. And in a way of people trying to control other people's emotions. So I'm wondering, as an 8, does shame come into your experience with anger?
Yeah, so shame, not so much, or I guess that's not the naming I would give it, right? What I would say that I have felt before is I can't share with you that I'm angry, and so I don't, and this goes back to that trust thing. I don't trust you enough to show you that I'm angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets kind of a weird. It's not quite shame, but it probably looks and smells a lot like shame, right? But it's more of a there's yeah, probably it's probably because there's a fair amount of trust in there. So
well, and I think Ken, I don't think 8s experience a lot of shame around their anger, because it's this, I think they feel the positiveness or the energy of the 8 that they understand. I think it's the rest of us that are shaming it. I think the rest of, and anger is what we call the energy of boundary. So if you listen to anger, it's often talking about a boundary has been crossed or a boundary needs to be set. And so anger has this really important function, but we don't like it. We shame it and we guilt it. And I think 8s, in some ways, healthy 8s can show us what the goodness of the power of anger, and actually to create, good in some sense, righteous anger that can be directed towards really good things. Linda, you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question, comment?
Yes. Jim, this is really useful for me. It makes me realize that the 8s that I've known, I haven't given them a run for their money, because being a 4, I would back away quickly. But what I want to know is, what enabled you to enter this territory and be willing to look within and share what you discover with other people?
That's a good question. I would say that having bumped into enough things when I was angry, it made it fairly easy to do. I'm pretty heady, and so I tend to do a lot of stuff in my head, and I tend to. It's kind of interesting that the kind of the gut stuff, because I don't necessarily think of myself as that's kind of my focus. I tend to think through stuff, but I'm also aware that I let me back up. There was a good chunk of time, and I think I said this earlier, when I considered this kind of a family curse. Once I started kind of being aware that there was also good to it, it made it easier to kind of talk through it and to share it. And and that took a while. It took a while. So I guess that's probably about as good as I can answer on that as far as timing of when that goes. But I don't know that I would have done it when I was in my 20s. I'm 53. So I don't know that I would have done it, if I was 23 or 24 years old. I didn't kind of become aware of this until I was probably in my early 40s. So.
Well, Jim, I'm gonna. Thank you so much. I think everybody always, when we do Enneagram panels, thinks, "Wow, having conversation with the eights was always really helpful." And again, I think we could do a whole show on each number. But I want to thank you for your vulnerability, because vulnerability is a challenge for eights. That's one of the challenges that they face. But I always appreciate you being on, and thanks for the words that you've shared with us. So.
Yep, absolutely.
So I do want to move on so we can have time to look at our other numbers. And so we're going to look at the 9 now, and got a couple of slides, and we'll jump in and give a brief description of the 9s. So the 9s are what we call the crown of the Enneagram. And a lot of times they're called the crown of the Enneagram because 9s have the capacity to have a lot of similarities with a lot of numbers. They can take the perspective of a lot of people. They are called the peacemakers. And when people have trouble often figuring out what their number is, it's often because they're 9s, because they've seen all of these other people in them. Because they were able to have this great capacity for perspective taking. So they're in the anger triad, and which is interesting because 9s seem the least angry, but they're in this triad because that's their real challenge. 9s have a way of forgetting or disconnecting from their anger, from their gut. So their fixation is in their instinctual energy, and they lose touch with it. They often report that they've lost touch with it because in their early childhood environments that were maybe conflictual, the way in which they made things calmer is they removed their voice and their energy from the situation. And so they seek right relationships, calm relationships, often at the sake of removing their voice or removing their energy from the situation so it didn't make it more conflictual. The challenge with that is then they actually, over time, stopped knowing where they were. The Enneagrams 9 and 2 are what we call the most self-forgetting types. 2s forget themselves because they're caring for others. 9s forget themselves because they lose their capacity to know where their energy is. They've repressed it or they've forgotten it. And then they have a hard time knowing what they think, where they are, what they want. 9s make great friends. I love hanging out with 9s because, whenever I say, hey, let's go get something to eat, where do you want to go? They're like, oh, I don't care. Where do you want to go? And I do know where I want to go eat because they don't have much skin in the game on that issue. They can take other people's perspectives. The challenge becomes often when 9s feel like there was an important decision or they needed to be engaged in the conversation and they weren't. And then it passed them by and they ended up in a place they didn't want to be. So resentment because they didn't engage is one of the things 9s sometimes deal with. They really like to merge with other people. They like that feeling of being able to take another person's perspective and engage in it. And a lot of times that's okay, except for sometimes they can move into what's called sloth, which is they so disconnect from their own energy, they lose energy for life and choices. Hoarders are often 9s because they don't want to make a choice about something, so they just keep it. And so they keep all of this stuff rather than having to go through the struggle of making a choice just on should I keep this or should I throw it away. So a lot of times 9s can have a lot of stuff around them because it becomes from that they didn't engage their center or know where they were. So as you can see on these levels of health, self-possessed guide at the top level, receptive person, supportive peacemaker. And you can see all of that being really healthy and good as long as nines do know where they are. Where it gets bad is, or I wouldn't say bad, where it gets unhealthy for them is they become a denying doormat, disassociated automaton, and self-abandoning ghost, right? So you can see that their life energy, they get so separated from it that they lose touch with it and therefore lose their motivation for their sense of calling in life. You can see it, 9 moves to a 3 in integration, right? Because 3s know where they're going, they're goal-oriented, they have a lot of energy to go out there and do it. And when 9s are integrating, they have some clarity about their life force and energy and can really move forward and be, pretty dynamic leaders. Towards disintegration, they move into some of the skepticism that 6s naturally have. They're skeptical about everything, or they can see the negative in everything. And so therefore they move into kind of the inactivity that 6s can experience from their skepticism. We'll show you famous, on the Enneagram, on the Myers-Briggs, 9s, a lot of introversion with 9s, although there are some extra, I think they're kind of on the line between E and I. A lot of them are perceptive, right? So judging and perceiving, you can see how judgers like to have order and clarity. They like to make decisions about things. Perceivers put off making decisions. They like to keep options open. So you can see that they're primarily introverted perceiving types in what we would call Myers-Briggs work. And then famous 9s are Audrey Hepburn, Ronald Reagan, Janet Jackson, and Kevin Costner. I don't think I would know that about any of them, but anyway, whoever put this together thinks they're 9s. So, Ida, thank you so much for being on, and share with us how you relate or don't relate with being a 9, and then we'll have some opportunity for some questions. Thanks for being here. Introduce yourself a little bit.
Thank you. I'm going to start by saying that I'm not surprised Winnie the Pooh is a 9, because it explains to me why I love the way Pooh moves through the world, through the shows. Anyway, so in the last show I watched, I think it was called Christopher Robin's Pooh or something. There's a scene where Winnie the Pooh is sitting in the back seat or in the passenger seat, and as the car's moving and driving, he just stares out the window and names everything he sees. So it goes something like this: tree, 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 car, tree, right? And I love that so much because it spoke to the 9 being so present in what is right in front of them, as opposed to where they're going, where they're coming from. So it's this middle ground, right? That speaks very true to me as a 9. So I'm Ida. I am in Louisville. I just recently moved to Louisville a couple of months back, not really to move full time. It was just going to be a stop between Cincinnati and Louisville. I'm working for an employer in Cincinnati remotely, but I'm here where my daughter is in Louisville. Got roped into IPP through Judd and this online stuff, and just loving it. So thank you very much for that. Born and raised in South Africa. I am an American citizen now after 14 years in the States, and I am a professional career and business coach. But that suffices as an introduction.
That's perfect.
Because I want to dig into this.
Yeah, jump into the 9.
Stuff. So I took the Enneagram assessment early last year with a coach it's not really my coach, it was just a colleague who asked me to do it. I did it. She gave me the report. It said I was a 9. I read the word sloth and I was totally affronted by it. Wanted nothing to hear about sloth. Such a terrible sounding word. And so, but it speaks true to your example of the hoarder. So if you are not in a good, healthy space, it can become the hoarder. but it can also go the other polar opposite, as in you get rid of everything, like you're not attached to anything at this, right? So it can go either way, just depending on the person and where they're at. So I wanted to just clarify that. Okay. I'm here to defend the nines. So anyway, I got reintroduced to the Enneagram literally, I think 2-3 months ago through Judd's programming. And I thought, all right, I have the time and the mindset and the space to really dig into this Enneagram now that I've been here. And I did, and I started reading up on it and attending sessions like this. I even joined an Enneagram 9 group on Facebook just to get some feedback from other nines in terms of what comes up on that feed. And here's what I have found to be true for me. And if we're going to call it a 9, I'm just going to call it me Ida-ing, okay? So when I find that I started making this diagram of the 9, and then next to it, I put the wings of the 8 and the 1. And I could totally resonate when I saw myself moving into this space or that space. Like I mentioned earlier, the 8, when I move into that 8, I kind of see exactly where Jeff is at in terms of the anger. I can totally understand that. The challenger. When a boundary is crossed, like you said, or there wasn't a boundary set to begin with, and you bump into it, I tend to find myself in the challenger mode. But before I go to the challenge mode, I go to the 6, because apparently when the 9 is under stress, it moves to the 6. So I went and did some research on the 6, and I'm like, yep, that sounds about right. Because it's that unclarity, it is that uncertainty that causes the anxiety within me that makes me feel like I want to push away from whatever is causing the aggravation. But I think as a healthy 9, I bounce from that 6th place into my 1 place, my other wing, where I go inside, because it says the anger with anger triad, the anger is internalized as a 1, if you're a 1. So from that place of anxiety, I go inside myself and I do the work, and I find out why this has affronted me so, to a point where I feel this anger. And I believe that's what they call the reformer. That's where you look at everything and how you plug them into place so they work better, right? That's the reformer. So, and once I have clarity in that, I go back into, well, yeah, I'm still angry, and I was right to feel angry. There's that justification coming in. So then I move into my challenger mode and then address the situation with clarity, yes, with anger, but also from the heart. That's where my 3 comes in, right? So if a healthy 9, when they integrate, they move into the heart space. So I can be angry, and I think I've said this to you before, Judd, is you can be angry with someone without putting them out of your heart. So it's like a mother being angry with her child when they've done something terribly wrong, right? You can be so mad at them because they put themselves in danger, or they step, whatever, that your response as a parent comes with anger, but that child has never left your heart. So anyway, so yeah, there's definitely correlation between the wings and me as a 9, and then also when I'm under stress, how I move into the 6. And when I am integrated, I move into the 3 space. And what I came to find just by doodling all this stuff on a piece of paper, that when I connected those 5 numbers, it actually created a 5-pointed star, which it just feels like a holistic approach to my exploration of this 9, is not to just look at the 9, but also to look at my wings. When do I see myself going to those wings? And then where do I see when I have a gut reaction or just a reaction to something that happens in my space, what do I do with it? So then the 6 and the 3 comes into play. So for me, it's captured in a good way. I can accept it as a scholar. I can appreciate it. I'm by no means a fanatic. I'm more, if I had to say, I'm more of a Myers-Briggs person. And on the Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ, which just by looking at your sketch over there, I saw it fell into a 3, which means when I'm integrated as a 9, I'm also the INTJ as in the Myers-Briggs, which is the architect. It's the creator, right? Putting stuff together. So that is my take on 9s, my personal experience on 9s, and I guess I'll stop there. Thank you.
Fabulous, Ida. So let's feel free to unmute yourself to ask some questions of Ida. If you're on Facebook Live, you're also welcome to type those in. Anybody have a question for Ida? 9s. I have a question, Ida. What's the difference between going with the flow of things and also as a good way of moving, and when that for you turns into I don't want to engage because I'm afraid of conflict? Or,
oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's another thing that keeps coming up around the 9 description, right? Is this, we don't like conflict. We shy away from it, actually push away. But see, I want to give clarity here, because here's me, let's say in a boardroom, and there's a disagreement going on. Let's say half of the room is wanting to go one way and the other half of the room wants to go another way. I think it's important here to note that being the crown of the Enneagram, not making it better or worse than any other number by all means, but that simply means that we can see every single number in ourselves. And so I can totally get both sides of the argument going on currently. And because I can see both sides of the argument going on, I mean, I can't pick a side, really. So it's not about not picking a side because I'm afraid to. It's because I can see both sides of the story. And so I'd rather, and there was an example, it was a YouTube video I listened to on a lecture about 9s, and how this one 9 was quiet in this room for the longest time while debating was going on. And finally somebody turned to the 9 and said, well, you've been really quiet. Let's give you a chance to speak up. And the 9 said something, just one sentence that was so profound that everybody was like, oh, so we've just spent 3 hours for nothing. Right, let's get out of here and go grab a beer. Because we understand that both are right, both are justified in laying it on the table, and both needs the space to do so. But it doesn't necessarily mean, but I've got to say, when I've got skin in the game, and I'm vested emotionally in someone or something, that it's affecting me emotionally just by default because I'm vested, I will pay attention. I will pick a side, but I would first need clarity on why I'm picking this particular side. That's why I said to Jim earlier, as a challenger, you know, when I step into that 8 zone, I come prepared. I'm very clear on why I'm saying what I'm saying. And if you can prove me wrong, I would love that. Let's go and explore that. It's more exploring for the architect to do. But it comes with a very definitive, very confident way of putting my side on the table, which can be also confused as arrogance or superiority when it's really not the intention of it at all. So when a 9 does take a stand on something, be prepared that they've done the research and they know the why.
Yeah. How about the issue of passive aggressiveness? A lot of times people talk that are in relationships with 9s feel like, they didn't speak up, but that's going to come, their opinion's going to come back out, you know, later. Like if we don't get it now, we're going to get it later. What can you tell about what that comment is?
Yeah. So the reason I mentioned the star, that's what's so key, is because when a 9 goes into the 1, it internalizes the anger. That's where passive aggressiveness lives. So it comes out in other ways. But like I say again, I feel like I'm a healthy enough 9, meaning really I just know myself very well because I've done the work, that when I do see that coming up, the resentment, you don't stop there, because you've got to move to the challenger side of things to do the research and know your why, and then move to the 3 when you do communicate your why, but from a place of passion and caring and heart. So, and once you share from that place of 3, this is why I really care about this, because I'm so vested in it. Anyone hearing that message will then be able to connect viscerally with that 9, as opposed to the 1 who's acting out passive aggressive, or the 8 that comes at you with like a ton of bricks.
Thanks, Ida. I want to bring in, we just have like a few more minutes, but we've got another, Judy and Susan. Y'all both identify as 9s. Do y'all want to share some as well?
Sure. Yeah, I was raised in a family with 3 younger brothers. I was the oldest, and so I was like the princess. But I think my mom's philosophy, she'd grown up in a very conflictual family with a lot of fighting, and she had decided anger does not exist. You don't really feel it. It's just, I remember her explicitly saying, I'd say, I'm mad, and she'd say, no, you're not. So there was, but it was all this underneath kind of stuff and kind of maneuvering around, but there was never any explicit anger. So that was sort of the style that seemed to work in the family, and that's, so I do feel, I have a daughter who's a 9, and we kind of joke about it. She knows a little bit about Enneagram, and we'll say, well, where do you want to eat? Well, I want cheese. Well, I want this. Well, I don't want that. Well, I don't care. And then one of us will say, yes, we'll eat there, and but I don't really want to. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
So we can kind of get in, but we can laugh about it, because we kind of know it's hard to make a decision.
Good.
I like being a 9. I think I'm content. I feel very happy most of the time. I set low expectations. It works great. You know?
Yeah, right. I hear you. That's like,
yeah.
just go with the flow.
Go with the flow.
Be happy.
It works, and I can access my 3 when I need to for leadership kind of stuff. But mostly it's okay. I kind of like it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thanks, Judy. Susan, do you have any thoughts right before we move on?
Yeah, I was born right in the middle of 7, so peacemaker, and I thought that was interesting about what Ida said about this Facebook group, because as soon as I started learning from you, I thought, oh, let's see if there's a group, but there is, and it happened to be my birthday, and I thought, I just prefer like not showing up, like nobody know. I don't put it on Facebook, but people wish me happy birthday like that. So I put it out there, and it's like, I got like over 80 responses of people that are 9. But yeah, it's like, they don't want to be the center of attention. That's for sure. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Susan. Appreciate you being on. So I do want to give time to our 1s. So we're going to move on. Again, thanks, Ida, and the rest of you all for sharing about your numbers. So let's explore the 1s in our time that we have left. Let me get to my right slide. So the type 1, the reformer. So type 1s are also in the head in the gut triad, and they deal with anger by going inward. And this usually looks like the form of often they talk about 1s having the parental ego, or the super ego, the right that tells us what's right and wrong, that little voice in your head that tells you what's right, what's wrong, what you should do. Sometimes we all kind of know that voice, the super ego, the parental ego complex that we all have. Well, 1s report that is huge for them. Like, that voice is very loud, telling them what they should do, what they've done wrong, what this could look like if it was done better. So there's always this kind of running voice often that 1s talk about it. They're often aware when they walk into a room what's wrong with it. or when they see something, they're very easy to pick out, oh, well, that's not quite right. That could be better. You know, they make good editors. They have a kind of a knack for pointing that out. But what's interesting is that ones they can come across to other people as being critical, but we have to know that they've been critical of themselves first before they're critical of other people. So they hold themselves to these really high standards of doing things right, perfectly. Sometimes they can be called perfectionists. In their unhealthy states, they can be. But when they're healthy, if you look at their healthy levels, the wise realist, the reasonable person, principled teachers, they often make really good lawyers or judges and teachers or police officers. They like law and order. They like to know that things can be done well and be done right. And they hold themselves to those standards that they should be done. As you can see, that what happens when they start getting unhealthy is that critical voice begins to be the only voice. And they can fill them with shame or guilt because they didn't do things right. At their lower levels, a judgmental perfectionist, intolerant misanthrope, yeah, obsessive hypocrite, and punitive avenger. So you can see that their anger then moves outside in some ways that can be hurtful to relationships. Under stress, often ones go to a 4, and that's because they are often overwhelmed with all of the things that they have to do, that they can become depressed. They can't do anything right. They're not going to be able to get out of this situation with doing it right. And so they kind of give up, or they become depressive is kind of what it looks like. The 4's kind of depressive mood. Ones can experience that out of criticism of themselves, or feeling like they've got too much to do and they're not going to be able to do it all right or well. Towards a 7, one at a 7 is like a one on vacation. Is really what a 7 is, because they lose this voice that's always criticizing them. And on vacation, they can be very spontaneous. They can go with the flow. They don't. They're aware of not necessarily what's wrong, but what's right. And they can be much more flexible and amenable, and kind of go with the flows like 7s do. They can be happy and spontaneous because they get away from this critical voice. And that's a 1 at a healthy place. The Myers are here famous Enneagram personalities: Hillary Clinton, Gandhi, John Paul II, and Al Gore. So maybe Democrats are all, some of the strong Democrats in the 1 category there. But you can see in really healthy places like Gandhi, he is the social reformer, and they can order their lives based around the values that they hold very well. Like if they hold a value in the world, you can be assured that they've already put their lives underneath that value. So they can have a lot of authenticity and integrity to their values, because they hold themselves to those as well as holding other people to them. In the Myers-Briggs, again, they can be extroverted or introverted. They're kind of all over the place with T and Fs. But the big category for them is a J. Almost all 1s are Js. Again, it's like liking order, liking to make decisions about things, having clarity about things, not like the Ps. Ps just like to keep things open. But J's are really like order, like the judgers do. So we've got 2 fabulous 1s, Olga Maria and Terry Lessor. Olga Maria, why don't you start and introduce yourself a little bit to us? Olga Maria used to be a Louisvillian, and that's how I got to know her, but she doesn't live here anymore. And Terry Lessor used to be used to be from Louisville as well, and she's not here. So you all introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about the 1. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Judd. This is really fun. I'm glad to be here. I'm getting a lot out of it. I'm Olga Maria Cruz. I am currently the campus minister for Winthrop Episcopal Lutheran Campus Ministry at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. This is the end of my second year here and my third year in campus ministry. Before that, I was, wait for it, an ethics professor. Are you surprised? No one's surprised. At Bellarmine University in Louisville for about 12 years. So I've been, before that, where I learned about the Enneagram was at the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, where I did an MDiv and a PhD. My PhD is in ethics, because as soon as they told me that ethics was a thing, I was like, why have they been keeping this a secret? This is my calling in life, right? That is also where I learned about the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram. I don't agree with the whole Enneagram, Myers-Briggs thing there, but clearly the J. I'm an INTJ. The T and the F are pretty close together. And I have a strong 2 wing, but I really love listening about the 9, and I can relate to a lot of what Ida shared. So I'm interested to reflect a little bit more about how sometimes I might lean to that 9 wing. But I thought I would share a little bit about how I know I'm a 1. For me, I think a good picture when I think about my childhood development and being 1, I'm the oldest child, and I think there's a tendency in that position to be more orderly and compliant. I found that with my relationship with the adults in my life, including parents and teachers, that following the rules and being compliant helped me. That was something that was really important, to be really respectful of people and structures, and to have really high ideals, to always try my best and all that sort of thing. But it wasn't so much about achievement. So I don't see myself as a 3, but it was just about, I always cared the most about being good. I just always cared, like when I thought about what's the first thing about me, that phrase, you don't know the first thing about me. One day I sat around thinking, well, what is the first thing about me? And I pretty much immediately was like, I'm a good person, and it's really all I care about. I just want to be really good, and I want everybody else to be as good as they can be, and I want to help them do that. The image I get of myself as a child in enjoying my oneness was that around the age of 8, I got my first little job, my first role outside the home as a library page. And I loved that. I didn't think of it as like a page in a book, as a page like to a knight, in shining armor. And that I got to organize and alphabetize things. I got to look at there was back there the card catalog. I got to stamp the due date on things because everything was in order. And one day I got to clean the books with this special wintergreen smelling paste. And I loved getting up on my little stool, and I was doing a service to the community, right? Things were all where it was quiet and peaceful for my little introverted self. It was all orderly for my J self. And I was setting things right and being a helper. So that's my 2 wing as well. The way that I act out my desire for things to be the best they can be is to be a helper. The other ways that I know I'm a 1 is that my arrow of disintegration, when I'm having a hard time, I do show up with some of the 4-ness of no one knows my secret pain. I'm tragically unique. It's so hard to be me, and I can't even tell anybody about it because no one would understand me, which is not true. And when I'm doing really well, I see that 7 in myself. And now that I'm building some friendships with 7s, I'm like, yeah, I can get some of that bouncy Tigger energy, and I get really enthusiastic about new ideas, and I'm always looking for new things. I am a new idea person. Whatever the question is, whatever's going on, I can come up with a new idea about how to make it better. So if you went for a walk through the neighborhood with your 1 friend, if they were bold enough to say it out loud, they would be critiquing everything that they saw, right? I'm walking through the neighborhood being like, well, that should be that's not the right paint color for that. And they need to get the moss off of that roof. This is all I've been doing for the last few weeks, right? For months, I've been all I can go is walking through the neighborhood, right? So, and I just want to make it better. We want to edit. I love that. Like, they're a good editor. I'm like, I'm an awesome editor. I'm going to pick up, not on this, the big picture things, but those making your sentences better. So good at that. I was also in English. I taught English as well, as ethics, but yeah, that's how I know that I'm a 1, and I'm happy to hear from Terry and to take questions. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you. Terry, jump in.
Oh, you would not want me as your editor, I'll say that. But outside of that, I identify with a lot of that stuff. And when I took the test online, actually a couple of times, twice, it had me as a 3. And so at one point I tried to be this 3, and I can even remember Carol Frame Matthews, this is how long ago this was, saying, hey, I don't think that's it. And it's not, because it really wouldn't be okay for me to be the best, even if it was a CEO who made like $1 million a year, the best accountant or the best anything. What I need to be the best at is always setting a good example. That's very important for me. And making the world a better place is definitely my priority. And it's kind of how I know that I'm not really a 2, because I could look at the 2, and I think other people probably see me as a 2 because I've always worked in human services. And when I'm with a client, absolutely, that person, there's nothing more important to me than that person. But if I really get down to what's my goal, my end goal, my goal is reform. Absolutely. And I can't, like, absolutely nothing would be more, maybe I shouldn't admit that my 9-year anniversary was yesterday, but absolutely nothing could be more, because what could be, and I don't understand why that's not everyone's goal. Why wouldn't making the world a better place be absolutely at the top of your list of things to do?
Because we're trying to be happy. I mean, that's what everybody should be, happy.
Oh, that's the problem. That's the problem. Oh, yes. Thanks for that clarity.
7-in-1 dialogue. What do you mean?
Yeah,
help the world? I want to be happy. If helping the world makes me happy, that's great.
Yes. Yeah. I think my husband might say something sort of close to that, but I'll give you just a little story too that helps me see this oneness. And first of all, thanks for naming the critical voice thing, Judd, because good God almighty. I mean, it's unreal. I mean, I wake up in the morning. If I have to have a spiritual practice in the morning, that's my balm, BALM. That's my medicine. If I don't, it's just this straight jump into all of the things that I need to do that I didn't get done, and how I'm not doing things well enough. And it's never okay to just do something okay. That's like, it makes me laugh when I say that, because that's insane. But I wouldn't call myself a perfectionist, although I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's not that I every hair has to be in place, my house has to look perfect, but I'm not investing my time and energy into anything that doesn't seem important to me in that category of what's important. And if you're going to do those things, you better do them to the best of your ability, and shame on you if you don't. So shame on me if things don't turn out the best. And so the things that I always have to work on myself with is going, but you did try your best. You did try your best. You do care. It just didn't come out the way you wanted it to. And I don't know that anything ever would come out. It'd be hard for something to really come out, probably, and me say, yeah, that's great. But just a quick story I thought might be helpful, or show, because you're talking about, the narrative of how this shows up. We moved into a new house. My husband wanted some flowers in the front yard. And as soon as he says he wants flowers in the front yard, he starts to put on his shoes like he's just going to go to the store all willy-nilly and buy some flowers. What? No. What the heck are you even thinking? I'm like about ready to lose it. No, we don't. First of all, we got to find out, we're in a new state. What are the native plants? What are the best pollinators? You're not just going to throw a bunch of silly flowers in our front yard. What will our neighbors think? Our neighbors going to think like that I don't know better. Oh no, we're not having that. I got to check with the Sierra Club. All of those things happened. So I do 2 weeks of research to find out. I check with the local Sierra Club. Do they even recommend a particular store that I go to? Who's really environmentally friendly? Don't tell me you are. Who's really environmentally friendly, because that's where we got to go. Well, we're out going for a hike and we go by this nursery and he's like, well, let's just stop and take a look. I agree, but I don't want to. My stomach, I can feel it coming on. First thing I do is walk up to the lady and say, do you have organic plants? Where's your organic section? Do you have a native plant section? How do I know which one are the pollinators? And the woman's like, we don't have none of that. And I turn around and start walking back toward the car because I'm thinking, we're done here. My husband's loading flowers onto the cart. The next thing I know, we have $100 and something worth of flowers that I don't want going into the back of the Jeep. And I'm so upset. And then I'm thinking, should I be this upset that I don't say anything? And so it takes me like 24 hours to go back to him and say, that wasn't okay. I had spent 2 weeks that, and anyway, so you all get the point. But and part of that too was the need to set a good example. I do want all of those things in my yard. I want the organic, local pollinating because that is the right thing to do. And anything short of that is just not really, it's not okay. And I have to explain to him because sometimes he's like, Terry, sometimes we just get things done. Oh no, we don't. Yeah. You're making me live outside of my value system. And he's scratching his head going, Terry, it was a tray of flowers. It's not just the flowers. It's not just the flowers. So anyway, just to give you, that's what's happening inside of me.
You all have done such a good job of helping us understand what's going on there, because it's amazing to me. So let's open it up to some questions. Ken, you got a question? Why don't you jump in? You got a lot of questions.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. So I have a question. Do ones struggle with procrastination because of trying to make life fit into their value system?
That's a good question. What do you think, Olga Maria?
I never have. I never have. I really, I want to get things done. I want them to be timely. If you were here at the beginning, like Judd noted that Terry and I were the first people on the call, like we were punctual. Like, just give me a deadline. It did take me a while growing up to learn how to set deadlines for myself. But yeah, if as long as I can create a deadline, I can stay focused pretty much. Though pandemic brain fog is real. And yeah.
Good. Terry? What?
I personally do, but for me, under stress, they say the 4 depression, mine's anxiety. And so anxiety, I mean, for some people, for a 3, it probably does make them like really get stuff done. I will procrastinate. And it's also too, because a lot of times I do have a lot of different things going on. And so it's just easy to put it off. But so I do, but that's maybe more about my anxiety than being another number 1.
We got some more questions. Jim?
Yeah, so I'm in a relationship with a 1, and it drives me bonkers because I just want to go, I want to play with the plant thing for a second. They're just plants.
No, they're not. Terry and Olga Maria want to reach through there and choke you. Jim.
That's like my chance. But I guess the thing is, how do you have a conversation with a 1 and say, is this really where you want to burn the energy? Or I mean, how do you say what's the pecking order of priorities, right? Because like Terry, you said, like having your house perfect was not necessarily one of your things, right? But the plants work, right? So how do you like figure out what the Maslow's prioritization of the 1 is, right? And it doesn't shift. I mean, do you have like, this is the end all be all, and it's a fairly fixed thing, and then you can kind of work around it. Does that make sense? Maybe not.
Well, maybe the question is, how do we, those in relationships with 1, how do we
not
work with you in that space?
Yeah. And be respectful too, right?
Well, as a person who's about to turn 50, maybe that has something to do with it. I don't push my stuff off on the other people. I don't think so much. Maybe I do, but I don't really that I do, push my ideas off onto other people. My thing with that gets caught up with my husband sometimes is like that wherever you spend for me, where I spend my money is that like money is a vote thing. And so that becomes almost like a religious practice to me, that where I spend my money and support. So I don't think that I do that to the general population. And, but I'm not going, there's certain things that I'm not going to budge on, because to budge on it would mean that I feel like I'm like tearing the world down. No, it's so, when I say it out loud, I realize how ridiculous it sounds. But then again, I don't think it's ridiculous, because I do think it is important. And I can really, like she said, that I can really show up with some good, when I go there with my husband, like, this is why this is so important to me. There's nothing he can usually say about it, because I'm not going to argue with you over the color of a car or where we eat for dinner or something like that. I mean,
but you can name the stuff that like pulls at you like that.
Yeah, I think it's important to value ones for their ethics and for their standards, and for the fact that that they have those values, and dig deeper to find out why. Like, why are they not budging on this? You know, why is this important? And then, you know, negotiate from there. But make sure that that one in your life that you try to figure out, like, how they're trying to make their world better, since their world includes you. Like, now they can appreciate your protectiveness and your ability to defend those boundaries. Like, maybe you can sort out where those are together.
Good answer. Yeah, thanks. Good question. Linda, did you have a question? We got just a couple more minutes.
Yes. I'd like to make a case for the ones to see the value for them of tapping into the upside of 4. I think in my book, people who are always out reforming miss that inner world of looking at themselves and working on their own stuff. And it seems like you all have done that, but I often find myself maybe thinking more than saying that the 4s, it might be your arrow of disintegration, but there's something there for you.
Yeah, Olga, Maria, Terry, do y'all want to respond? My sense is that when ones do go to the 4s, that's the real benefit of going there, is then you all reflect on, how did I get here? It's a pretty reflective space, my sense is. Olga, Maria, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I guess I would say that, you know, talking about an arrow of disintegration is not to downplay the beauties of 4-ness. I love a lot of 4s. I'm an artist. I'm not as creative. I'm a musician who plays other people's music rather than making up my own. But like there's a lot of beauty there as well. And it's not at all to denigrate the type of 4, but just to say that when I'm in a hard place, sometimes it looks like a 4 having a hard day, you know. And the one other thing I wanted to add about anger and our experience of anger, I learned about the Enneagram over 25 years ago, and I pushed back against the anger being part of this type, and I just didn't get it. And I didn't get it and couldn't find my anger. And then I read just slightly different language around it in another Enneagram experience last summer that said, for some people, and I think it's especially true of people like me who tend to be a little more compliant and anyway, I can think of a lot of reasons why it would show up like this for me. That anger in the 1 can show up as just a constant low level of frustration, irritability, or impatience. And I'm like, oh, how did they know that about me? And I had not even recognized it in myself until that moment that I read it on a little computer screen. I'm like, oh, that is so true. That is true of me all the time. I am recently, I can always tell you. If you asked, I would not usually admit it. I would not usually put it out there, but I can always tell you all the ways that I want to be better, all the things that I would want to fix about myself, all the things that could be better about absolutely everything, and how I want to fix it. And it does register as just this chronic low level of like, yeah, thanks.
Good. Well, we've run out of time, which always happens. So I want to say thanks to our panelists. Again, thanks for your vulnerability, your honesty, and it is so helpful to hear your stories. It really makes it come alive in that narrative tradition. So a deep bow to you all who are willing to share about yourself and be vulnerable. And thanks to the Enneagram community for continuing to bring this work into the world, that we could all be healthier, more aware people and have more harmonious relationships. So thanks for being on. I do want to let you know that next week, July the 3rd, we will not meet. So we'll be back again. We'll put up a old version of our Enneagram Community of Practice next Friday, but we won't have a live session. So have a good long weekend next weekend. And thanks so much for all of you being on. Your great questions, and may you have a fabulous weekend, and may we all be healthy, wise, and whole. Thanks very much. Peace. Be good. Thank you all, panelists.